I think now let's take a look at KGIs, KPIs, and KRIs. You may see it on the exam, but it will definitely help in your day-to-day job. So KGIs are key goal indicators. Think of this as, did we reach our goal? This is something we measure after we're done. We have something in place, and when we reach a certain point or when we're done, we measure how well did we do. In my work experience, it could be when I was an IT project manager. As my lessons learned we did after the project, then we'll go in on that specific project and compare how well did we do for meeting the deadlines on time, on finances. And we can either do that at the end of the project or at each major milestone. This is a look back, and we start out with that at the start of the project. We have very clearly defined parameters for what success looks like, and if we do that, if we reach that goal, well then we are successful. Now, if we did not reach our goal, well then why? What was it that went wrong? What can we do next time to improve the outcome? And this is not something we do to lay blame. We do this so we can improve our processes, we can improve our workflow, so for the next project, we avoid the same issues. Then we have KPIs, key performance indicators, and that is us measuring how well we do on one specific task. And there is a direct correlation between the goal and the performance. The KGI, the key goal indicator, is the overarching thing that is everything, where the KPI, the performance, is specific and it has a lot more detail. And it's very common to use KPIs across our entire organization. So when I worked at a hospital, that could be, how many admissions do we have? How long is the length of stay for a patient on average? If we're a company that does phone sales, how well does this person do on an average day versus the rest of the team? How long do they use on support calls? And then we use those to see if our teams are meeting the targets that we have set or not. Which then brings us to KRIs, key risk indicators, where some of you have probably used KPIs and KGIs before. I'm assuming many of you have not used KRIs. And we use those to quantify and demonstrate the risk that the organization could be facing or how risky a certain activity is. And we also use them to measure how well we adhere to the risk appetite that our organization has. And that was the one where this is an acceptable level of risk, and this is set by senior management. Since senior management has set that specific risk appetite, we need to make sure that we adhere to it. And the key risk indicators can also be an early warning system. Here, we can identify potential events that could be harmful if we continue our activities on a specific project. Since we know the risk is there, we can do something about it. And here again, we can accept the risk, we can mitigate the risk, we can transfer it, we can avoid it, but we cannot reject it. And with that, we are done with KPIs, KRIs, and KGIs. Let's continue with risk response and mitigation. At this point, we have identified our risks, we have the full asset inventory, we have done the risk assessment, that has been presented to senior management. Now they get to choose how we respond. At this point, we also update the risk register. Remember, that's that giant Excel spreadsheet that has a list of all the risks and all the pertinent information about that one specific risk. We now implement the countermeasures and lower the risk, which is the whole point of risk management. Reduce the risk to an acceptable level. We could have chosen not to lower the risk, we could have chosen to accept the risk, but we still did the whole risk management process just to be very clear on the ROI, return on investment. If it costs us $250,000 a year if we don't do anything, but the fix is going to cost $1 million, well then we probably leave it as it is. After we have implemented the mitigations, we again update the risk register because the scores are going to be lower. And that brings us then to the next phase, risk and control, monitoring and reporting. And this is kind of a weird convoluted sentence, right? But it is both the risk and the control that we need to monitor and report on. In this phase again here, this is due diligence. The only phase that is due care is risk response and mitigation. This is where we actually act. In this part, we actually do something, we act. In all the other phases, we research, we prepare, we make sure that things are working like they should. And while I say that risk management is an iterative life cycle, we go around, that doesn't mean that once we start risk identification again, we stop with monitoring and controlling. Monitoring and controlling needs to keep going because we need to make sure that the countermeasures we put in place keep being good enough and no new risks emerges. Or maybe the risk just actualizes in a way that we did not expect. So we monitor the risk, we monitor the control, and of course, we do reporting on both. This is ongoing. And now you'll see the reason why I stopped on risk management to take a minute to talk about KPIs, KGIs, and KRIs. So when we implement a single control, we need to understand how that single control is performing. That is the KPI. If we just implement the control, the countermeasure, and we don't really know how it does, how do we know if we're protected enough? How do we know if we need to implement more controls or different controls? We need to make sure that both we have the right controls in place and they are as effective and as efficient as they need to be. So with the KPIs, we put a number on that control. Now, if you have ever worked with project management or heard about it, you might know that in a lot of projects, we go through one phase, then the next phase, then the next phase. That's not really true for risk management. If we are in a large organization, then it's very likely we're in all 4 phases at the same time because we're not treating all the risks at the same time in the same phase. Some risk might be in assessment, some might be in monitor and control, other risk might be in response, because new threats and new risks emerge all the time. So we go through the identification, the assessment, the response and mitigation, and then monitoring and reporting for that specific risk. When something else emerges, we do it all over. And this doesn't mean that we keep doing thousands and thousands of risk assessments over and over because the process is iterative. I think most places I have worked in would do an annual risk assessment for everything. But then whenever we introduce new things into our environment, new servers, new processes, new applications, then for those applications, processes, and servers, we do the full risk assessment and we add that to the annual plan. The same when new risks emerges. Then the following year, all the things we did since the last risk assessment is rolled into the new one. There could be some exceptions to this if we have systems that are very critical. Ones that, if they don't function or the data gets stolen, we might be forced out of business and have to close as an organization. Maybe here it's every 3 months. So every 3 months, we do the full risk assessment just for those pieces. Now, I understand this is going to seem overwhelming. It's going to seem super complex. But here, you're just starting out. You just need to understand the basics of it and also understand that most of this we can build from frameworks that are already made. There are a number of good frameworks that address specifically risk management that you can tailor for your organization. You don't have to go out and reinvent the wheel. Someone has done it for you. On top of someone having made most of the processes for you, there are also models that measure an organization's risk management maturity. And that really just means how good are we at this? And then they have actionable steps that you can take to get to the next level so your organization can be as good as it needs to be on risk management. And with that, we are done with this lecture. Thank you for being here, and I will see you in the next one.